Carmen woke up before dawn in her small apartment in Madrid. The dim light of dawn barely illuminated the room as she stretched and got out of bed. With a prolonged yawn, Carmen went to the kitchen. Her steps were clumsy, but she moved with the urgency of someone who knows that every minute counts. Upon reaching the small space, she glanced at the clock on the wall and hurried her movements. Lucy, in her slightly wrinkled school uniform, was sitting at the table, still half asleep. "Good morning, my love," Carmen said with a tired smile as she ran her hand through Lucy's messy hair. "Good morning, Mom," the girl replied, rubbing her eyes. Carmen put water on to boil for coffee while she prepared a quick buttered toast for Lucy. After making sure Lucy was ready for school, Carmen hurried to get dressed. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, noticing the deep, dark circles under her eyes. She sighed and went back to the kitchen to say goodbye to her daughter. "Come on, Lucy. We don't want to be late," Carmen said, taking her daughter's hand and walking out the door. The journey to Lucy's school was quick. Carmen said goodbye with a kiss on the forehead and a promise to pick her up on time. Then she headed to work, walking briskly through the streets of Madrid, her heart pounding at the possibility of being late. Arriving at the restaurant where she worked, Antonio, her boss, was already there, arms crossed and a stern expression on his face. "Carmen, you're late again," Antonio said without preamble. "I'm sorry, Antonio. I had to take my daughter to school," Carmen replied, trying to remain calm as she put on her apron and headed for the kitchen. Antonio watched her disapprovingly as she quickly cleared a table and took orders from the first customers. Throughout the morning, Carmen worked tirelessly, serving customers with a forced smile, but her thoughts were constantly on Lucy and the need to keep this job to be able to take care of her daughter. At noon, Carmen took a short break at the back of the restaurant. Leaning against the wall, she closed her eyes for a moment, letting fatigue wash over her. However, her rest was brief, interrupted by Antonio's voice calling her back to work. "Carmen, we need more coffee, at table 3, he said impatiently. "I'm coming," she replied, straightening up and going back inside. The afternoon passed in a similar fashion, with Carmen moving from one task to another with hardly a break. The bustle of the restaurant filled the air. Carmen moved between the tables with agility, carrying plates and serving coffee to customers. Although her face wore a professional smile, her eyes betrayed the accumulated fatigue of weeks of hard work. The customers, however, did not seem to notice her fatigue, occupied with their conversations and meals. "Waitress," a customer called from a nearby table. Carmen approached quickly, holding a coffee pot in one hand and a notepad in the other. "What can I help you with?" she asked, keeping her smile. "More coffee, please," the man said without looking up from his newspaper. As she filled the cup, Carmen heard Antonio's firm voice behind her. "Carmen, I need to talk to you," he said, his tone brooking no argument. Carmen finished serving the coffee and headed to the kitchen where Antonio was waiting for her with his arms crossed. "What's up, Antonio?" she asked, trying to remain calm. "I need you to stay a few more hours today. Juan is not going to be able to come and we are packed," Antonio said bluntly. Carmen's heart sank. She looked at the clock on the wall, calculating how long it would take her to get to Lucy's school. "Antonio, I have to pick up my daughter from school. I have no one else who can do it," she said, trying to sound convincing. Antonio frowned. "When I hired you, you told me that your family situation would not interfere with your work. I can't keep covering for you, Carmen," he said, his tone stern. Carmen felt a knot in her stomach. She knew she couldn't afford to lose this job. "I understand, Antonio. I will do my best to stay," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Antonio looked at her harshly but finally nodded. "Okay, but make sure it doesn't happen again," he said before returning to his office. Carmen let out a sigh of relief and went back to her work. As she served the customers, she couldn't help but look at the clock every few minutes. Every second that passed felt like time was slipping away. Finally, quitting time arrived. Carmen took off her apron and ran to the door, her mind filled with worry. She arrived at school just in time to see Lucy leaving the building, her small figure standing out from the other children. "Mom!" Lucia shouted when she saw her, running towards her. Carmen bent down to hug her daughter, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "I'm sorry I'm late, honey. Did you have a good day at school?" she asked as they started walking home. "Yes, Mom. We learned about plants today," Lucia said, her voice full of enthusiasm. Carmen smiled, listening to her daughter talk about her day. Although she was exhausted, Lucy's joy gave her strength. When they got home, Carmen quickly made dinner. While Lucia was taking a bath, she sat at the kitchen table, going over the bills and thinking about how they were going to make ends meet. She knew she would have to find a solution soon. "Mum, I'm ready for dinner," Lucy said, entering the kitchen in her pajamas. Carmen smiled and got up to serve the food. As they ate, they talked about their days, trying to forget for a moment the worries that awaited them. "We're going to be okay, Lucy. I promise," Carmen said, more to herself than to her daughter. After putting Lucy to bed, Carmen sat in the living room, thinking about her next move. Carmen entered the HVAC class just in time, her breathing ragged and sweat beading on her forehead. The classroom was full of students, all with their notebooks open, ready to take notes. Carmen slipped into a chair at the back of the room, letting out a sigh of relief as she dropped her backpack to the floor. She took out her notebook, the corners frayed from constant use. Her eyes closed from time to time, the accumulated fatigue from long hours of work and few hours of sleep beginning to take its toll. "Everything okay, Carmen?" Dylan asked, a classmate, noticing her state. "Yes, just a little tired," she replied, mustering a weak smile before focusing on the teacher. The instructor, a stern-looking man, paced the front of the class, explaining the fundamental concepts for the upcoming final exam. "This exam will be crucial," he said gravely. "If you don't pass it, you will have wasted your time and money." Carmen's heart skipped a beat. She knew how much was at stake. She gripped her pen tightly and leaned over her notebook, taking notes hastily. Every word from the instructor seemed to carry immense weight. "Don't forget to review last week's topics," the teacher continued, "and make sure you understand how the refrigeration system works." Carmen tried to concentrate, but her thoughts were divided between her worry for Lucy and the fear of not being able to pass the exam. She felt that every minute in class was a battle against exhaustion. "Here you go, Carmen," Dylan said, handing her his notes. "I know you're going through a rough time. These will help you catch up." Carmen looked at Dylan, grateful. Their eyes met briefly, and she nodded, accepting the notes. "Thank you, Dylan. Really, I don't know what I would do without your help," Carmen said, her voice reflecting a mixture of gratitude and weariness. The teacher continued explaining, and Carmen tried to stay focused. She knew that this exam was her chance to change her life and her daughter's. Every word of the instructor echoed in her mind as a warning of what was at stake. At the end of class, Carmen stayed in her seat for a moment, reviewing her notes and Dylan's. She felt the mountain of information she needed to learn was overwhelming, but she couldn't let herself fail. "Do you want to review together later?" Dylan asked, packing his things. "I'd love to, but I have to pick up Lucy from school and then go to work," Carmen replied, feeling the weight of her responsibilities. "I understand. Well, if you need any help, you know where to find me," Dylan said, patting her on the shoulder before leaving the classroom. Carmen stayed a few more minutes, organizing her thoughts and planning how to divide her time between studying, working, and taking care of Lucy. The determination to improve her life through education was what kept her going, despite the difficulties. She left the classroom and quickly headed to Lucy's school. As she walked, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and hope. She knew the road ahead would be arduous, but each step brought her a little closer to her goal. Arriving at the school, she saw Lucia waiting for her with a smile. Carmen bent down and hugged her daughter tightly. "How was school today, honey?" she asked, trying to keep her voice cheerful. "We learned about plants and drew flowers," Lucia replied with childish enthusiasm. Carmen smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope amidst her exhaustion. She knew that every sacrifice was worth it for Lucia's future. That night, after putting her daughter to bed, Carmen sat down to study. She opened her books and Dylan's notes, determined not to let exhaustion get the better of her. Carmen's day began before dawn and didn't end until late at night. Her daily routine was exhausting. First, she would drop Lucy off at school, then run to the restaurant where she worked, and afterwards to the HVAC class at night. Every minute was timed, every step crucial to maintaining the fragile balance of her life. She navigated the crowded streets of Madrid, her face tense and her mind overwhelmed with worry. She checked her watch repeatedly, her pace quickening with each passing second. The honking of cars and the constant hum of the city created a background noise that amplified her stress. Arriving at the restaurant, she immediately set to work. The tables full of customers, the never-ending orders, and Antonio, her boss, who didn't give her a break. Still, Carmen tried to maintain a smile, although the fatigue showed in her eyes. "Carmen, I need you to work a few extra hours tonight," Antonio said without looking at her, busy with his order list. "Antonio, I can't today." "Look, Carmen, we need everyone available. If you can't commit, I'll have to find someone who can," Antonio said, his tone uncompromising. Carmen felt a knot in her stomach. She knew she couldn't afford to lose this job, but she also knew that Lucy needed her. "I'll do my best, Antonio, but I have to make sure my daughter is okay," she said, trying to sound convincing. Antonio nodded dismissively and went back to his tasks. Carmen continued working, but her mind was elsewhere. Every time she looked at the clock, her anxiety increased. Finally, when her shift was over, she ran out of the restaurant. The streets of Madrid were more crowded than ever. Carmen dodged the crowd, her breathing ragged and her heart racing. She reached Lucia's school just in time to see her come out, but the worry didn't go away. "Come on, honey, we have to hurry," she said, taking Lucia's hand and hurrying her toward the daycare. Arriving at the daycare, Vanessa, the person in charge, was waiting for her with a stern expression. "You're late again, Carmen," Vanessa said without a trace of empathy. "I know, Vanessa, but I'm doing the best I can. I work, I study, and I have to take care of Lucia," Carmen replied, her voice reflecting her desperation. "The rules are clear. Every time you are late, there is a fine," Vanessa said, handing her a bill. Carmen's hands trembled as she counted the money, realizing she didn't have enough. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Please, Vanessa, I can't pay this time. I promise it won't happen again," Carmen said, her eyes pleading. "I'm sorry, Carmen, but I can't make exceptions. I need the accounts to be up to date," Vanessa replied, unwavering. Carmen nodded, accepting the bill with resignation. She took Lucia's hand and they left the daycare, the tension palpable in the air. "Mom, is everything okay?" Lucia asked, noticing the worry on her mother's face. "Yes, honey, everything is fine. We're going home," Carmen said, forcing a smile to reassure her daughter. As they walked home, Carmen felt the weight of her responsibilities take hold of her. Every day was a constant struggle, and although her determination was firm, the reality of her situation was slowly wearing her down. That night, after putting Lucia to bed, Carmen sat at the small kitchen table, surrounded by books and notes. She had to study for the final exam, but her mind was filled with worry. She took a deep breath and opened her books, knowing that the only way forward was to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Carmen woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of Lucy coughing. The room was dark, lit only by the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains. She got up quickly and went to her daughter's bed. Lucy was burning with fever. "It's okay, honey. Mum's here," Carmen whispered, her voice full of concern. She took the thermometer and placed it under Lucia's arm, her hands trembling slightly. She waited for what seemed like forever before checking the temperature. The fever was high. "Don't worry. We're going to bring that fever down," she said, trying to sound calm as she looked for the syrup in the medicine cabinet. Carmen spent the rest of the night by Lucia's bedside, applying cold compresses and making sure she was comfortable. When dawn finally broke, she knew she had to make a difficult decision. She picked up the phone and dialed the restaurant's number, knowing that calling to say she couldn't go to work would put her job at risk. "La Buena Mesa restaurant. How can I help you?" answered the familiar voice of Antonio. "Antonio, it's Carmen. I'm sorry, but I won't be able to come in today. Lucy is very sick and I need to take care of her," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Carmen, you know we're short-staffed. I can't afford for you to miss today," Antonio replied, his tone annoyed. "I understand, Antonio, but I have no choice. My daughter needs care," Carmen said, feeling desperation creeping into her voice. "If you don't come, you'll have to face the consequences," Antonio said, hanging up without another word. Carmen dropped the phone, her face pale. She knew what that meant. She tried to maintain her composure in front of Lucy, who was looking at her with feverish and worried eyes. "Everything will be all right, honey. You rest, Mum will take care of everything," she said, stroking her daughter's hair. After making sure Lucia was comfortable, Carmen decided to go to the restaurant and talk to Antonio directly. She couldn't afford to lose her job. She arrived at the restaurant with her heart in her throat and found Antonio at the cash register. "Antonio, please, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Antonio looked at her with indifference. "I already told you everything on the phone, Carmen. I can't keep tolerating your absences," he replied. "Please, Antonio, understand my situation. I will do whatever it takes, but don't fire me," Carmen pleaded, her eyes filled with desperation. At a nearby table, Dylan watched the scene in silence. He saw the fear and determination in Carmen's eyes, but also the inflexibility in Antonio's face. "This is not personal, Carmen. It's a business, and I need someone I can rely on," Antonio said definitively. "Please, Antonio," Carmen began, but he cut her off. "This is your last paycheck. Good luck, Carmen," he said, handing her an envelope. Carmen took the envelope with trembling hands, feeling her world crumble around her. However, she knew she couldn't afford to break down. She thanked Antonio and left the restaurant with her head down. "Carmen," Dylan called, catching up to her outside the restaurant. She turned, surprised to see him there. "I saw what happened. I'm so sorry," Dylan said, with a mix of concern and sympathy in his voice. "Thank you, Dylan, but I'll be fine. I have to be fine for Lucia," Carmen replied, trying to sound strong. "If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask," Dylan offered, looking at her seriously. "Thank you, Dylan. I really appreciate it," Carmen said, feeling a glimmer of hope despite everything. She walked back home, each step heavier than the last. When she arrived, she found Lucia asleep, her breathing still heavy but stable. Carmen sat down beside her, stroking her forehead and promising herself that she would find a way forward. Carmen sat in the HVAC classroom, her eyes focused on the instructor as he explained the fundamentals of the refrigeration system. Despite the fatigue that consumed her, she took notes diligently, her determination unwavering. Every word from the instructor seemed to carry immense weight, and Carmen knew she couldn't afford to be distracted. Dylan, sitting next to her, noticed her effort. He had seen how Carmen struggled day after day, balancing her work, her studies, and caring for her daughter. He admired her resilience, but he also worried about her. "Carmen, if you need help with the notes or anything, don't hesitate to ask," Dylan whispered during a short break. Carmen looked up from her notes, her eyes showing a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you, Dylan. I really appreciate your offer. I'm doing my best to keep up," she replied, trying to sound strong. The class continued, and Carmen continued to take notes, even though she felt her strength fading. The pressure of the upcoming final exam was getting to her. She knew this exam was crucial to her future and Lucia's. Failing was not an option. When class ended, Dylan stayed behind with Carmen for a moment while she packed up her things. "Do you want to review together? I can help you understand some of the more complicated topics better," offered Dylan with a kind smile. Carmen hesitated for a moment. She knew any help would be valuable, but she also felt the need to maintain her independence. "Sure, Dylan. I could use an extra review. Thanks for offering," she finally said, acknowledging that she couldn't do it all alone. They met at the library that afternoon. Carmen spread her notes out on the table, trying to focus on the material. "Carmen, you seem to have a lot on your mind. Are you okay?" Dylan asked, noticing her distraction. "It's complicated, Dylan. I'm trying to balance everything, but sometimes it seems impossible," admitted Carmen, looking down. Dylan nodded, understanding the burden she carried. "Look, I know it's hard, but I'm here to help. We're going to get through this together, okay?" Dylan said, his tone firm and reassuring. Carmen felt a glimmer of hope in his words. Despite the difficulties, she was not alone. She had someone willing to support her in her struggle. They spent the next few hours reviewing the course material. Dylan patiently explained the more difficult concepts, and Carmen began to feel more confident. Though fatigue was still present, Dylan's presence and support gave her the strength to keep going. "Thank you, Dylan. I don't know how to thank you enough," Carmen said at the end of the review, feeling a mixture of gratitude and relief. "You don't have to thank me, Carmen. I just want to see you succeed. I know how important this is for you and for Lucy," Dylan replied, smiling. That night, Carmen returned home with a new perspective. She knew that things were still difficult, but she also knew that she had Dylan's support and the determination to overcome any obstacle. As she studied at the kitchen table, her hands trembled slightly with exhaustion, but her spirit was stronger than ever. The worry about the exam was still there, but now it was accompanied by a renewed sense of hope. Lucia came over and sat down beside her, looking at her mother's books curiously. "What are you studying, Mummy?" she asked, her big eyes full of innocence. "I'm studying for a very important exam, honey. It's so we can have a better life," Carmen replied, gently stroking her daughter's hair. Lucia smiled and hugged her mother. "I know you'll do great, Mummy. You're the best," she said, with the unwavering confidence of a child. Carmen felt her eyes welling up with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of determination and love. She knew that with the support of Lucia and Dylan, and with her own inner strength, she could face any challenge. Carmen stood outside the classroom where the HVAC final exam would take place. Her heart was pounding, and her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her backpack on her shoulder. She inhaled deeply, trying to calm her nerves before going in. She knew that this moment was crucial for her future and Lucia's. As she entered the room, the silence was almost deafening. The students were scattered in their seats, all focused on their own thoughts and anxieties. Carmen made her way to a seat in the back, trying not to attract attention. She sat down and took out her pen, her hands still shaking. The instructor distributed the exams, and as he passed by Carmen, he gave her an encouraging look. Carmen nodded slightly, grateful for the gesture. When the clock struck the start of the exam, she took a deep breath and began to write. Each question was a reminder of the long nights of studying and the sacrifices she had made. Her mind went over the concepts and calculations with precision, but the anxiety wouldn't leave her. As she progressed through the exam, she felt that each answer brought her closer to her goal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the instructor announced that time was up. Carmen dropped her pen, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She handed in her exam and left the classroom, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. Outside, Dylan was waiting for her, leaning against a wall with a reassuring smile. "How did it go?" he asked, noticing the fatigue on Carmen's face. "I think it went well. I did my best," she replied, trying to process the emotions that flooded her. Dylan nodded, clearly impressed by her determination. "Carmen, there's something I need to tell you," he said, pulling a card out of his pocket. "I didn't mention it before because I didn't want you to feel pressured, but I'm the director of Titan HVAC." Carmen looked at him in surprise. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Really?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, and I want you to know that I've been observing your dedication and hard work. I'm very impressed with your spirit and your resilience. Here's my card. When you get your exam results, call me. I want to offer you a job at my company," Dylan said, extending the card towards her. Carmen took it with trembling hands, unable to hold back the tears that were starting to form in her eyes. All the tension and fear accumulated over the last few months overflowed in a torrent of emotions. "Thank you, Dylan. You don't know how much this means to me," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You deserve it, Carmen. You're one of the hardest working and most dedicated people I have ever met. I'm sure you'll have a bright future with us," Dylan replied, smiling sincerely. Carmen couldn't help it. Tears of happiness streamed down her cheeks. After everything she had been through, she finally saw a light at the end of the tunnel. She knew this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that would allow her to provide a better future for Lucy. "Thank you, Dylan. Really, thank you," she said, wiping away her tears and trying to compose herself. "You don't have to thank me, Carmen. Just make sure you call me when you get the results. I'm looking forward to having you on our team," Dylan said, giving her a pat on the shoulder before saying goodbye. Carmen stood there, staring at the card in her hand, feeling a wave of hope and determination. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt in control of her destiny. With a renewed sense of purpose, she headed home to share the good news with Lucy. As she walked, a small ray of sunshine broke through the clouds, illuminating her path. Carmen smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The next morning, the postman delivered an envelope. Carmen held the envelope in her hands, her fingers trembling as she carefully opened it. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, and the sound of the paper ripping seemed to echo in the silent living room. Lucy watched her from the couch, her big eyes filled with curiosity and hope. With a deep breath, Carmen pulled out the sheet of paper and began to read. Upon seeing the word "approved" written in bold, she felt a torrent of emotions. Tears of joy began to stream down her face, and she couldn't help but let out a sob of relief. "Mom, you did it!" exclaimed Lucy, jumping off the couch to hug her mother. Carmen hugged her tightly, feeling a mixture of gratitude and hope. This was the first step towards a better future. "Yes, honey, I did it," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. Immediately, Carmen grabbed her phone and dialed Dylan's number. She needed to share the news with him, who had been such a staunch supporter throughout this time. "Dylan, I passed the exam," she said, barely containing her excitement. "I knew you could do it, Carmen. I'm so proud of you," Dylan replied, his voice full of joy. "Now, let's talk about your future. Are you still interested in the job at my company?" Carmen felt her heart race again, this time with the thrill of a new opportunity. "Of course, Dylan. I'm ready to start whenever you need me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Perfect. Stop by the office tomorrow and we'll get started on all the paperwork." "Welcome to Titan HVAC, Carmen," Dylan said with satisfaction. "Thank you, Dylan. Really, thank you for everything," Carmen replied, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. After hanging up, she turned to Lucy, who was looking at her with a radiant smile. "What does that mean, Mum?" the girl asked curiously. "It means we have a new opportunity, Lucy. I'm going to start a new job that will help us have a better life," Carmen explained, hugging her daughter. That night, Carmen couldn't help but reflect on the long road she had traveled. From the endless hours at the restaurant to the nights of studying, every moment of struggle had led her to this point. Her determination and resilience were finally being rewarded. The next day, Carmen showed up at Dylan's office with a mixture of nerves and excitement. The office was bustling with activity, and the professional atmosphere gave her a sense of hope and purpose. "Welcome, Carmen," Dylan said, shaking her hand. "I'm sure you'll be a great addition to our team." "Thank you, Dylan. I'm excited to get started," Carmen replied with a genuine smile. They spent the next few hours filling out forms and learning about her new responsibilities. Carmen felt that each signature and each instruction brought her closer to the stability she had longed for. That afternoon, she returned home with a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. As she opened the door, she found Lucy waiting for her with a smile. "How was your first day, Mom?" she asked, running towards her. "It was amazing, honey. This is the beginning of something very good for us," Carmen replied, lifting Lucy into a hug. As they ate dinner together, Carmen told Lucy about her new job and what it meant for their future. There was a palpable sense of hope in the air, and Carmen couldn't help but feel that all her hard work was finally paying off. That night, while Lucy slept, Carmen sat at the kitchen table, reflecting on all she had achieved. She had gone through very difficult times, but her determination and the support of people like Dylan had helped her overcome them. Carmen showed up at her new job early in the morning, her posture straighter and more confident than ever. As she entered the Titan HVAC office, she felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. The reception area was buzzing with activity, with employees busy at their tasks. Carmen took a deep breath and approached the counter. "Good morning, I'm Carmen. I'm starting today as an HVAC technician," she said with a smile. The receptionist smiled back and asked her to wait a moment while she called Dylan. A few moments later, Dylan appeared and greeted her with a warm welcome. Carmen, welcome aboard. Come on, I'll show you your workstation and introduce you to the team, Dylan said, leading her through the office. As they walked, Carmen observed everything around her. The office was well organized, and the professional atmosphere made her feel like she truly belonged there. Dylan introduced her to her new colleagues, who welcomed her with enthusiasm and kindness. Carmen, this is Marcos. He'll be your mentor for the first few weeks, Dylan said, pointing to a middle-aged man with a friendly expression. Nice to meet you, Carmen. I'm here to help you with anything you need, Marcos said, shaking her hand. Thank you, Marcos. I appreciate your support, Carmen replied, feeling a growing sense of belonging. The day flew by. Carmen immersed herself in her new tasks, learning the procedures and becoming familiar with the equipment. As the hours passed, her confidence grew. She felt that she was finally on the right track to provide a better future for Lucy. At the end of the day, Dylan approached her workstation. "How was your first day?" he asked, his tone genuinely interested. "It was a good day. I feel comfortable, and I'm excited to learn more," Carmen replied, smiling sincerely. "I'm glad to hear that. I knew you'd be a great addition to the team," Dylan said with a look of approval. Carmen left the office with a sense of accomplishment. As she walked to Lucy's school to pick her up, she couldn't help but reflect on the long road she had traveled. Every challenge, every sacrifice had been worth it. She picked up Lucy and they returned home together. As they prepared dinner, Carmen told her daughter about her first day at her new job. "Did you like your new job, Mom?" Lucy asked, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Yes, honey. I like it very much. I think this is the beginning of something very good for us," Carmen replied, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. After dinner, they went out to the porch to enjoy the sunset. Carmen sat down in a chair, holding Lucy in her lap. They watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Mum, do you think everything will be better now?" Lucy asked with a mixture of hope and innocence. "Yes, Lucy. I'm sure everything will be better. We're on the right track," Carmen said, hugging her tightly. As they watched the sunset, Carmen reflected on her journey. From the struggles at the restaurant, the nights of studying to exhaustion, and the constant struggle to balance her life. Now, she felt that all that effort had paid off. Sitting there in silence, Carmen felt an inner peace she hadn't known in a long time. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she also knew that with each step, she was building a better future for herself and Lucy. The determination and resilience that had brought her this far were still her driving force. With each passing day, she felt more capable of facing anything life threw her way. The night advanced and the sky darkened, but in Carmen's heart shone a light of hope and determination. She was ready to embrace the future, trusting that the days ahead would be brighter and full of promise. Carmen smiled as she looked at her daughter, knowing that everything she did was for her. Together, they would face the future, strengthened by the love and hope that bound them. And with that thought, Carmen prepared for a new day, with the certainty that they were on the road to a better future. This story reminds us that, although life is full of challenges, there is always hope for those who persevere with faith and determination. Remember, as this story teaches us, God always blesses good people. Everything happens for a reason, and even if we don't understand the reasons behind our difficulties, we must trust that happiness will come into our lives if we keep our faith and keep moving forward. The story also shows us the importance of being kind and supportive to those around us. The encouragement and belief made a significant difference. If you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. That way, you can get notifications of more inspiring and touching stories that will surely move your hearts. Each story I share is a reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the power of hope and faith.